We responded to an apartment building when the caretaker had called us. His initial report was that he went to check on a suite, and because water had been reported flooding into the hallway, he informed us that there was a deceased lady in the tub. He said he saw her and immediately backed out without touching anything. We entered the suite. It was filled with steam. The humidity had started peeling the paint off the walls and sheets, and there was also the smell of cooked meat. Upon entering the bathroom, we found the supposed deceased seated in the tub with the hot water running. From the looks of it, she had been there a while. The skin on her body, all the way from her toes to sternum, had started separating. Much like the paint on the walls, it was bubbled and coming up in sheets. I checked for vitals while someone turned off the water, and the others went to get a bag and radio for a can. And when a body is badly decomposed, we put them in a sheet metal box. I almost shit my pants when I found signs of life. The lady had a pulse. She wasn't really responsive, but she was breathing shallow, had a heartbeat, and was looking at us. We had to get her out. We radioed for EMS and informed them that we had a live patient with at least 80% burns. They were a few minutes out, so we started to get the patient ready for transport. I don't remember what we were doing when we noticed the water draining from the tub, but what we saw was her torso, essentially degloving itself as the water receded. We immediately plugged the bathtub and continued working her. When EMS arrived, we had to transfer her to the stretcher. That's where things got ugly. We planned to gently lift her out of the tub and place her on the stretcher. However, as soon as we touched her, her skin was coming off in sheets. I remember saying, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have to do this," as I picked up my section and came away with almost all the skin I contacted stuck to my arms. That was the only time she made a sound. She probably couldn't feel it due to the nerve damage, but I'm pretty sure she knew she had lost almost all of her skin from the chest down. The water was still extremely hot, so we were also getting burned while doing this. We managed to get her onto the stretcher, and EMS took her away. When the bathtub was drained, there was a sheet of skin stuck to the bottom, and we had to scrape it off and bag it. I still can't eat certain chicken dishes because of this. We figured she was in the tub and the water got cool, so she turned it on with her toe. She must have had a stroke and couldn't turn it off again. Being an apartment, it had pretty much unlimited hot water, so that poor lady sat there for approximately 3 days, cooking. She did not survive. We don't get a lot of follow-up calls, but I heard she passed away. Between a stroke and severe burns, it wasn't likely that she'd make it. But we treat every patient like they have a chance. The human body is a weird and wonderful thing. Sometimes, people do make it through some pretty terrible things. I had a call around 9 p.m., just after I came on duty, of an elderly man with a possible high fever. Not a whole lot of info, as the caller was his elderly wife, who according to the dispatcher was hard to understand. Anyway, we head out and get there about 7 minutes or so later. As we go in, the wife is sitting at the kitchen table just inside the door, so we ask her what's going on. She answers, "He's been complaining he is too hot all morning." We go into the next room, which is dark due to curtains covering the windows, but there's enough light to see a dead man sitting in a chair. Now mind you, he was not recently dead. I'm talking blackened face, rot around the mouth. Wasn't complaining this morning type of dead. I set down my equipment, and my partner goes to turn on the light next to his chair so we can verify the obvious. As she goes to reach for the light, the dead man groans and reaches for her hand. After collectively shitting our pants, we jump into action. Come to find out, he was on oxygen and was a smoker. He was complaining about being hot because he was literally burning up. What looked like signs of death on his face was actually scorch marks and melted plastic. And to answer the obvious question, I don't know. He was still alive when we got him to the hospital, and I never asked what happened to him after that. My wife called me late at the end of my shift around 11:30 p.m., saying there was someone knocking on my door. I know it wasn't family or friends. She tells me it's a girl and she won't go away. The thing is, I have a take-home car, which means anyone nearby knows where I live. That's good and bad, I guess. So, I show up, and this girl can't be more than 15. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I can't explain why at the time, but the bottom of my stomach fell out. I approached, turned on my camera, and smiled. I'm CIT trained, crisis intervention, which helped in this situation. This kid starts crying, telling me that I helped her mother, so maybe I can help her. Her mother was seriously injured, and I patched her up until medics arrived. I ask her, "How can I help you?" She says, "You can help me die." I called it in as carefully as I could, keeping my face as neutral as possible, and spoke with her until backup arrived. I knew that if I had to shoot her, my family would be on the other side of the door, and I prayed to God that I didn't have to. I just kept thinking, please, don't give me a reason. Please just keep talking. As I'm putting her in the car to go talk to someone, we pull a large steak knife out of her pocket. Long story short, she did research on YouTube on how to suicide by cop and decided to come to my door to threaten me enough that I'd have to kill her. She was just a kid. My boss found her suicide note, and we later learned that she was being molested by a trusted family member. As we were talking in the hospital, she tells me the only reason she didn't pull the knife and force my hand was because I was so nice to her. That hit me hard. I still stay up at night thinking about how close I came to killing her, how I'd have no choice but to do so, and what it would have meant for everyone. All because she had no other way out. Not very creepy or scary, but a defining moment for me. The call came out as a simple suspicious person in a large nursing home with not that many more details. Myself and a buddy showed up to find a woman waiting out front next to her vehicle. The vehicle was off, and she carried a baby with her, maybe 3 years old, but still with those baby angel cheeks. The administrator tells me that the woman in question, who I refer to as Tracy, is a contracted worker for them, a sort of nurse who comes in from time to time to help out with the elderly patients. She shows up on her day off and starts talking to this elderly gentleman, Joe. Tracy places her baby in Joe's lap and wheels him out of the facility, Joe screaming the whole time. They stop her, and she gets mad because they're holding her grandfather hostage, and she just wants to take him for a walk. The only thing is, Joe is not related to Tracy, and is a retired cop himself. Tracy then gets distracted, tries stealing medication, and scratches another nurse when they stop her. By all accounts, not 6 hours earlier, Tracy was an ordinary woman. She went to work without complaint, seemed happy, and then went home. No history of drug use, no history of mental illness. The facility was reluctant to pursue charges due to the sudden abrupt shift in her personality. Like, she'd been replaced with another woman who looked just like her but was criminally insane. While speaking to her, Tracy seems normal. She tells me, in a very calm and obviously not crazy voice, what she's doing and why. She gives me all the information and doesn't cause any problems or give me any reason to take her into custody. Joe didn't want to press charges, and the facility declined as well. The only thing making it seem something was wrong was Tracy insisting Joe was her grandfather, which we proved he was not. My only other recourse was a sort of emergency custody order for mental health, but I had no reason to do so. Her son looked well cared for, so we elected to call for family to arrive. Her father showed up and confirmed that Tracy was okay. She didn't take drugs and had never complained about mental health or physical ailments that would lead us to believe something was wrong. I even spoke to a magistrate about securing charges to get her treated, since she refused to do so on her own, but he declined right off. The only option we had was the father trying to get a custody order against her. He took a few minutes speaking to her before pulling me aside and saying, "I can tell you that woman may look like my daughter, but that is not my daughter." As this is happening, I hear the car door open and the doors lock. My stomach dropped, though I couldn't tell you why. Consider it a sixth sense all cops have or are issued after time spent on the force. Sometimes someone sets off a trigger that you can't explain, and you better listen to it. Inside the car, Tracy's holding her bouncing little boy in her arms. I knock on the window and ask if I can talk some more. She refuses. I ask her if her father can hold the baby, and she tells me, "That's not my father." I try to negotiate while my supervisor, who witnessed the whole thing thankfully, tried the other doors. He took over talking to her while I positioned myself on the other side of the car, trying to open the door handles. Both of our warning flags were going off, and we couldn't say why. She gave no reason, and we had no cause. Then, Tracy says, "You're just trying to take away my baby." She pulls the baby into her chest, and the baby stops laughing. And the little jerks on its hands and feet tell me that it's not breathing. It took 3 swings of my baton to break the glass, all the while my supervisor is screaming at me to get in. I crawl across the broken glass and reach across the seat, pulling the baby's head from her arms. It lets out a bloody wail, and Tracy turns to look me in the face. I see the driver's side door open, and Tracy just fucking smiles at me. "You're just trying to take my baby, you white devil." It felt like it happened in an instant. Tracy bares her teeth and bites the baby. I hear the baby screaming now in pure pain. I reach forward, wrapping my arms around her lower jaw and up her forehead, and pulled her off. Tracy goes limp, and the grandfather takes the baby inside to be treated. He lived, but we never found his ear. I saw her later in court, after all the charges were dismissed, in lieu of lifetime commitment to a mental institution. All the life gone from her eyes, just like that night. The lights were on, but no one was home. I still can't explain how an otherwise healthy and vibrant person can go from 0 to crazy like that. It haunts me to this day, more than any ghost story I've ever heard. I was in medic school, finishing up some ride-alongs in a big city in Oklahoma. So we get this call at around midnight to a county address outside the city. It was a pretty vague dispatch, but possibly a fight of some sort. We start heading out there and find out as we're going along that it is way outside of town. It was one of those calls that, by the time we realize it's out of our coverage area, it just isn't worth turning around and letting someone else deal with it, so we kept going. So we're driving, and eventually are up in the hills on dirt roads, pretty much just driving around, with no real way of figuring out where our patient is. We haven't seen any houses, or cars, or people, and when we come around a corner, and there is just some ancient looking dude in the middle of the road. He doesn't flinch, even though we almost hit him, and just points further down the road, without saying anything, when we ask him if he called, and what's going on. Definitely weird, but whatever. So, we continue down the road, And eventually, we drive into this meadow surrounded by trees. And in the headlights, we can see this lady in the middle of the meadow just standing there. The meadow isn't huge, but our scene lights really don't light up the edges. So we pull up and start doing our thing. She's a little bloody, but really, it seems to be more psyched than anything. And she's really not doing much to help us figure out what's going on. After about 5 minutes, a county deputy pulls into the meadow and gets out and comes over to us. He seems really nervous and keeps looking around, which seemed really weird, and puts all of us a little more on edge. Another minute or two passes, and we all notice that it's gotten really quiet. Now, this is Oklahoma, in the middle of the woods in summer. The bugs had been making a huge racket. Now, just silence. All the hairs stand up on our necks, and one of the guys I was working with pulls out a gigantic spotlight from the truck and scans the tree line. My blood runs completely cold. There were about 20 guys with rifles, standing around the edge of the meadow, just watching us from the darkness. They weren't pointing them at us, but talk about sphincter tone, going from 0 to 100 in no time flat. We all are kind of just frozen, but after what seemed like 10 minutes, the deputy breaks the silence by simply saying, "Yeah, we should go." So we did. We climbed into the ambulance, dragged the patient with us, and booked it out of there. People from urban areas, or even small towns, don't realize it, but there are definitely hill people still out there who live completely separate from society. At our department, we had fairly strict policies regarding how we handled 911 calls that were either missed dials or dead air. We always sent 2 officers out to the address to ascertain why and how the call was made. Our state had a database of this information and put out statistics every year. Additionally, it was a fairly useful deterrent against the kids who love prank calling and the old folks who called dispatch just to have someone to talk to. We were a fairly small county. This particular case involved some fairly strange 911 calls in a newer subdivision in our county. Shortly after I began working as a deputy in early 2001, real estate developers began to build expensive housing in a newly cut subdivision that ran against one of the larger creeks in our county. Seemingly overnight, a huge wooded area turned into 800K plus housing. At night, myself and another deputy would go on foot patrol through the new subdivision. It was a way to kill time on slow nights, and another way to fulfill our curiosity about how big these houses really were. However, there was one larger, Victorian-style 2-story house that overlooked the river that we typically did a quick patrol through and got the hell out of there. I could never put my finger on it, but I always had a feeling of uneasiness whenever we walked on the property and through the home as it was under construction. The other deputy, a good friend of mine, always told me that the shadows were watching him when we walked through that house. We jokingly called the house Marilyn Manson's crib. We never felt weird in any other location inside the subdivision. Months passed, and most of the subdivision was complete by early summer. People began to move in, and all shifts at the sheriff's department began to patrol the area. However, the house that I felt strange in had seemingly come to a construction standstill. From talking to the general contractor, the real estate company had 3 potential buyers for the home, but they all backed out for various reasons. Now, this wasn't uncommon due to the high prices and uncertainty over property taxes, but something in my mind just didn't add up. After speaking to some of the subcontractors involved, it seemed like the potential buyers toured the property and noped out of the deal as quick as possible. Around December 2001, a buyer was finally found for the house, but the closing had to be delayed to finalize some utility issues. About 2 weeks before the new owners closed on the home, our dispatch received a 911 call from the home with dead air. I was on shift that night and took lead while another deputy headed my way. I went over to our secondary radio channel and began asking a ton of questions to our dispatcher about the nature of the call. All she could advise was she was getting dead air. The callback number was showing all sixes: 666, 666, 6666, and the address was showing to be the creepy house in the new subdivision. I found this quite odd, as the general contractor had sent our department the house numbering for this particular street a couple days before the call. I figured our dispatch supervisor had updated our 911 system to reflect these new addresses. When I rolled up on the house, it was completely dark. I stayed in my patrol vehicle and hit the house with my spotlight while I waited for backup to arrive. Nothing was found out of the ordinary, and no signs of vandalism were discovered. However, the entire time I was there, I felt a heaviness that I can only describe as someone pushing down on my shoulders and weighing me down. We closed the call out as unfounded. After we cleared, I let our patrol sergeant know what was going on. He felt that it was an error with the 911 system and stated we needed to inform the day shift dispatch supervisor. The next morning, I notified our dispatch supervisor about the error and was met with a perplexed look. She proceeded to tell me that this was impossible because the utility company had not run phone service to any of the houses in that part of the subdivision yet. Apparently, this was a utility issue that was preventing closing for the homeowners. She stated that she was waiting until the end of the week to update the 911 system to reflect the new addresses, as it'd be a waste of time to load in new addresses with no telephone service. Thus, the address could not have appeared in our computer-aided dispatch system. I believed our dispatch supervisor on her assessment. She had been with the county for 10 plus years, seen the 911 system designed and implemented, and generally did a very good job. So, I took her at her word, which unsettled me even more. Determined to get to the bottom of the issue, I passed it on to the day sergeant and asked if one of the deputies could follow up with the phone company if they were out working near that house. Later that evening, I found a note in my patrol box that stated, "The phone company is working on the lines in a different part of the subdivision. They won't be working on that address until later this week. The phone company doesn't know what's causing the 911 issue. Maybe dispatch got the address wrong." That night, dispatch received another 911 call with dead air from the same house, a seemingly impossible address included. Once again, we responded and found nothing out of the ordinary. The deputy that responded with me that night told me afterward that he felt like he was being watched the entire time we checked the perimeter of the home. I still felt the heaviness when walking around. The next morning, the patrol sergeant and I both spoke with the dispatch supervisor and basically told her the impossible was occurring and we needed to get to the bottom of it. She pulled the records from the night before, and sure enough, the impossible address was being sent from some unknown phone lines to our 911 system, which propagated out to the dispatch operator CAD and our in-car computers. By that evening, we all received an email from the dispatch supervisor stating that she had no idea how this was happening and believed it to be a glitch that she corrected in the 911 system. However, she added the new addresses anyway, since the phone company was almost done working in the area. Basically, she had no clue what was causing the problem. We started getting nightly 911 calls to the house. Our patrol sergeant finally told dispatch that we wouldn't be responding until the buyers moved in. In some weird way, this made me feel much better. I absolutely hated responding to that house. The next week, on one of my nights off, I heard on my radio that the patrol sergeant on the differential shift told two deputies to get to the bottom of what was going on at that house. Apparently, he believed that kids were somehow tampering with the phone system and just trying to waste the county's time. Bored and somewhat curious, I called the patrol sergeant on his cell phone and asked if the 911 call came in with dead air, like it had for us multiple times. He said that this particular call was downright creepy. Dispatch answered the call, and it sounded like someone was either gagged or the phone was completely muffled. Apparently, the person on the other end of the line sounded like they were in distress and sounded like they were talking at a rapid pace. Now, at this point, the new owner still had not moved into the house and, as far as I know, had not connected the phone service. Like all the other times before, the deputies got on scene, checked the perimeter, and looked through the house to the best of their abilities, and found nothing. However, one of them mentioned feeling unusually cold when walking near the back of the property. I talked with him later, as this was fairly strange since he was the only one who felt it, and our average temperature at night in December hovers a little above 55 degrees. The deputy who reported the coldness was directed by the sergeant to park in front of the house for a couple of hours to look out for anything suspicious. Apparently, he lasted about another hour and a half before throwing up about 6 or 7 times on the side of the road, and then took off for the evening. I talked with him about this experience a couple of days later, and he stated he felt fine after he left the area. However, he said the longer he was near the house, the sicker he felt. Anecdotal at best, but it still creeped me out. A few weeks passed. The new homeowners, a husband, wife, and 2 kids, moved in, stayed less than 3 months, and put the home on the market at a fairly substantial loss. We received numerous 911 calls from them, ranging from prowlers in the area to break-ins with a suspect still in the residence. Now, the calls were coming from the alarm company instead of the homeowners themselves. Apparently, they installed a fairly high-end security system with motion sensors that called the security company after the owners armed the system in the master bedroom before going to sleep. 8 out of 10 calls we received were for motion sensor activation alarms. I probably responded a total of 20 times in 3 months to the house. I think the alarm company was out there almost as many times, but could never find a defect in the system. The husband was continually traveling for business, leaving the wife and kids at home for the better part of the 3 months they lived there. The wife was absolutely convinced the house was haunted. Based on the contact I had with the wife, I tended to believe her. She was well educated, very articulate, and her description of shadows moving scared the hell out of me, as it was eerily similar to what my friend encountered. In fact, my deputy friend, who often responded to the calls with me, made it known to the wife that he saw something similar before the house's construction was complete. I still jokingly blame him for costing that family a ton of money after they got the hell out of there. Before the family moved, we encouraged them to get with the alarm company and install cameras that activated with the alarm system to see if they could record what was causing the motion sensors to activate and call the alarm company. However, they never did. I think the wife's persistence got to the husband, and he sold the house just to get her to stop talking about it. During the last month they were there, our sheriff felt it necessary to send an off-duty deputy to sit outside the residence on more than 3 occasions, just to ease the mind of the wife. Each time, a different deputy was sent. All of them reported feeling strange while on assignment, but no one reported seeing anything suspicious. Since the first family left, that house was owned by at least 12 different families since 2002. We kept getting 911 calls that were either from the alarm company or dead air for as long as I worked at the apartment. Most owners didn't stay more than a year and a half. I think most of them stayed there just long enough to sell the house at a reasonable price to the next poor, unsuspecting buyer. I particularly felt bad for the family who got stuck with the house during the housing crisis of 2008. I can't stress how strange this is, as the majority of the original owners in the subdivision continue to live there, and we rarely got any calls from them.